There's a mathematical turning point where money stops obeying effort and starts obeying time. Most people never reach it, not because they can't, but because no one warns them what it feels like right before it happens. There's a moment in every person's financial life that almost nobody talks about. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no champagne, no viral screenshot, no sudden lifestyle upgrade. It usually happens quietly, late at night, when you open your investment account out of habit and realize something unsettling. Your money is starting to move without you. For years, you've been doing everything you were told to do. Saving, investing, being responsible, and yet progress felt painfully slow. So slow that you probably wondered whether the whole thing was a lie. Whether compound interest was just another nice idea that only worked for other people. But then, one day, you notice the numbers growing in a way that doesn't feel proportional to your effort anymore. Your money is making more money than you could realistically earn by working extra hours. And that's when it hits you. This isn't motivation. This isn't hustle. This isn't luck. It's mathematics finally waking up. Most people never reach this moment. Not because they're lazy or bad with money, but because they misunderstand how wealth actually grows. They expect progress to be linear, predictable, fair, save $1, move one step forward. But real wealth doesn't work that way. It grows in curves, slow enough at the beginning to test your patience, then fast enough at the end to change your life. This channel is called Quietly Broke, and if you've ever felt like you're doing the right things financially while still feeling stuck, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 specific net worth tipping points where everything changes. Not motivational milestones, not arbitrary round numbers, but mathematically proven thresholds where money stops crawling and starts accelerating. If you want more videos like this that explain the financial game most people are playing without realizing it, subscribe to Quietly Broke and support the channel so we can keep making work that actually matters. Before we go any further, let me ask you one question. Which do you think is true? A. The hardest part of building wealth is earning more money. B. The hardest part is staying consistent long enough for the math to flip. Comment A or B below. And once you understand that wealth doesn't move in straight lines, the first place your expectations completely break down is at your first $100,000. This is the milestone that quietly breaks more people than any market crash ever could. Because on paper, it looks underwhelming. 100,000 doesn't feel rich. It doesn't feel powerful. And most dangerously, it feels small compared to the mountain people tell you you're supposed to climb next. A lot of people assume that reaching $100 means they're 10% of the way to $1 million. That single assumption is one of the most expensive misunderstandings in personal finance. Because it treats wealth like a ruler instead of a curve. The truth is, your first $100 is not the beginning of momentum. It's the end of resistance. In the early years, almost everything in your investment account comes directly from you. Your paycheck, your discipline, your ability to keep showing up month after month while the results barely seem to move. Compound interest exists during this phase. But it's quiet, it's unimpressive. It doesn't reward your effort in a way that feels fair. If you're investing consistently, it can take 7 or 8 years just to reach that first 6 figures. And during most of that time, it feels like you're carrying the entire weight yourself. You're sacrificing now for a future that still feels theoretical. That's why this phase is so psychologically brutal. But here's what almost nobody tells you. By the time you hit $100, you've already done the hardest work you will ever have to do. You've trained the habit. You've survived boredom. You've resisted the urge to quit when nothing felt exciting. You've proven that you can keep going without external validation. And that matters more than the number itself. At this point, something subtle shifts. Not in your lifestyle, and not in your ego, but in the math. Your money finally has enough mass to start contributing meaningfully on its own. Growth stops being a rounding error and starts becoming noticeable. Not life-changing yet, but undeniable. This is why people who quit early never get rich. Even if they earn good money. They confuse slow progress with failure. They mistake the warm-up phase for a dead end. Think of it like learning a complex skill. The beginning is awkward and discouraging. Progress feels invisible, but once you reach basic competence, Improvement accelerates faster than you expect. Wealth works the same way. Your first $100 doesn't change your life overnight. What it changes is your trajectory. From here on out, you're no longer pushing the system forward alone. The system finally starts pushing back in your favor. And once that foundation is in place, the journey stops feeling like pure effort and starts revealing something most people never stay long enough to see: acceleration. After your first $100, time begins to behave differently. Not in a mystical way, but in a measurable one. The same habits that barely moved the needle before now start producing results that feel disproportionate to your input. What once took nearly a decade no longer requires that kind of patience. The next 100,000 arrives faster, often in 5 years or less, sometimes sooner, and when it happens, it feels almost confusing, like the rules quietly changed without asking for your permission. This is the phase where compound interest stops being an abstract concept and becomes an experience. Your contributions still matter, but they are no longer the dominant force. Growth begins feeding on itself. Returns start generating returns, and for the first time, your account grows meaningfully even during periods when your own effort hasn't changed at all. That shift is subtle, but powerful. You stop thinking of your investments as something you add to, and start seeing them as something that moves on its own. The balance increases not because you worked more hours or made perfect decisions, but because time is finally doing its job. As your net worth climbs toward 200,000 and then 3. Something else changes as well: your relationship with uncertainty. Market swings that once felt terrifying start to feel manageable. You begin to understand that volatility is not the enemy of long-term growth, but the price of it. And because your portfolio is larger now, every percentage point matters more. This is also where behavior becomes more important than intelligence. Many people reach this phase and unconsciously slow down. They reduce contributions. They allow lifestyle upgrades to absorb the momentum they worked so hard to build. Not because they're irresponsible, but because things finally feel comfortable. Comfort is dangerous here. Because if you stay consistent, if you resist the urge to coast, the acceleration compounds even faster. By the time your portfolio approaches $400,000, most of its growth is no longer coming from you. It's coming from the system you built years earlier. This is the quiet inflection point where confidence replaces doubt. You stop asking whether investing works and start asking how far this momentum can carry you if you simply stay out of its way. And that question sets the stage for the most meaningful shift of all. The point where money doesn't just grow faster, but begins to change how safe your life feels. And once that momentum is undeniable, once your net worth has reached a size where growth feels self-sustaining, you cross into a phase that has very little to do with speed and everything to do with safety. Somewhere around $650,000, your relationship with money quietly changes. Not because you suddenly feel rich, and not because you can walk away from work tomorrow, but because the ground beneath you finally stops feeling fragile. Most people earn their income by trading time for money. A paycheck shows up because they showed up. Miss enough days, lose the job, and the income disappears. That reality creates a constant, low-level anxiety that shapes nearly every decision people make, from the jobs they stay in to the risks they never take. Now imagine what happens when your investments begin generating $40,000 to $50,000 a year on their own. That income doesn't replace your job. It doesn't mean early retirement or endless leisure. What it does is something far more important. It removes urgency. It softens the consequences of bad luck. It gives you room to breathe. At this level, losing a job stops being an existential threat. It becomes a problem to solve. Getting sick no longer automatically means financial panic. Unexpected expenses don't derail your entire life. The difference is subtle on the surface, but profound internally. You stop making decisions from fear and start making them from clarity. This is where optionality enters the picture. When you're no longer dependent on every single paycheck to survive, you gain the freedom to choose more deliberately. You can leave a role that drains you without immediately replacing it. You can negotiate harder, walk away from bad offers, or invest time in learning a new skill that won't pay off right away. You can even take a calculated entrepreneurial risk, not because you're reckless, but because failure wouldn't ruin you. This is what people misunderstand about wealth. It isn't about consumption. It isn't about lifestyle upgrades or outward signals of success. Real wealth is the ability to say no. No to work that compromises your health. No to environments that demand too much and give too little. No to living one emergency away from collapse. There's another effect at this stage that most people don't anticipate. When financial pressure eases, decision-making improves. People with a cushion think longer term. They take better risks. They invest in themselves more effectively. Ironically, many people earn more after reaching this level of security. Not because they work harder, but because they finally have the mental space to work smarter. At around $650,000, money starts acting less like a scorecard and more like a stabilizer. It smooths out volatility in your life the same way diversification smooths out volatility in a portfolio. The highs don't feel as intoxicating, and the lows don't feel as dangerous. You're still playing the game. You're still building, but you're no longer playing from behind. This is the tipping point most people never reach. Not because it's mathematically unreachable, but because it requires staying disciplined long after progress becomes comfortable. And yet, for those who do reach it, life doesn't suddenly become easy. It becomes manageable. And once you understand what that kind of stability feels like, you're ready for the final shift. The one that doesn't just change your finances, but permanently alters how you think about money, time, and possibility. And once that sense of stability settles in, once you realize that money can absorb shocks instead of amplifying them, you reach a final threshold that changes something deeper than your bank balance. Crossing the $1 million mark rarely feels the way people imagine. There's no rush of adrenaline, no sudden feeling of abundance. In today's world, $1 million doesn't buy instant freedom or a dramatic lifestyle shift. What it buys is something quieter and far more powerful: confirmation. It confirms that the system works. By the time you reach 7 figures, you haven't just accumulated money. You've built a process. You've stayed consistent through boredom, uncertainty, and market cycles that tested your patience more than your intelligence. That's why this milestone lands psychologically, not materially. It validates that wealth isn't reserved for insiders, trust funds, or lucky timing. It's accessible to ordinary people who stayed long enough for the math to compound. At this point, your thinking changes. You stop asking how to catch up and start asking how to allocate. Opportunity cost becomes instinctive. Every dollar represents not just spending power today, but leverage tomorrow. You see clearly how small decisions ripple forward over decades. This is also where the math becomes almost unfair in your favor. Each additional million requires a smaller percentage increase than the last. Growth builds on growth, and time becomes the most valuable asset you own. Market downturns stop feeling like threats and start looking like accelerants, because you understand that volatility rewards those who can remain patient. More importantly, fear loses its grip. The anxiety that once shaped every financial choice fades into the background. You're no longer trying to prove anything. You're optimizing for sustainability, meaning, and control over your time. The 3 tipping points are now clear. Your first 100,000 builds the foundation. 650,000 builds safety. 1 million builds mastery. The math was always available. The difference was whether you stayed long enough to let it work. Years from now, the question won't be whether you could have built wealth. It will be whether you were willing to remain consistent while it still felt invisible. When you step back and look at the entire journey, the pattern becomes clear. Building wealth was never about finding the perfect moment, the perfect strategy, or the perfect amount of money to start with. It was about understanding that progress is often invisible right before it becomes undeniable. The 3 tipping points tell one simple story. Early on, effort dominates and results lag. Then momentum quietly builds. And eventually, stability and optionality emerge, not because you worked harder, but because you stayed consistent long enough for the math to compound in your favor. Most people never reach that stage. Not because they aren't capable, but because they misinterpret slow progress as failure. The deeper lesson here goes far beyond money. In many areas of life, the most meaningful transformations happen on a delay. Skills compound. Trust compounds, health compounds, relationships compound, but we live in a culture that expects immediate feedback and visible rewards. which makes it dangerously easy to abandon the process right before it starts working. The practical takeaway is simple, but not easy. Design systems you can sustain. Automate good decisions. Remove the need for constant motivation. And most importantly, judge your progress by your consistency, not by short-term outcomes. If you're doing the right things and staying in the game, time will eventually do what effort alone cannot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe consistency over time is more important than intensity in the beginning? Or do you think most people simply don't earn enough to get ahead? Please leave your perspective in the comments so others can learn from it as well. And if this kind of content helps you think more clearly about money and life, consider subscribing to Quietly Broke. Your support is what allows the channel to keep creating thoughtful, honest content like this.